Desperate measures. Marcus Webb stood at the grimy window of his rented room, watching the three moons of Nixara rise over the industrial skyline, his reflection staring back at him with hollow eyes. 6 months stranded on this alien world, and he was down to his last few credits. His cargo ship had been impounded over a disputed tariff, his crew scattered to find work elsewhere, and now even this dingy room above the transit station was beyond his means. The rent was due 3 days ago. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, deliberate and unhurried, and Marcus knew exactly who they belonged to. He straightened his worn jacket and ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to look more composed than he felt. When the knock came, firm but not unkind, he took a breath and opened the door. Kessa Vorn filled the doorway with quiet authority. Her purple skin seemed to shimmer under the flickering hallway lights, darker than the lavender skies outside, with an undertone that reminded Marcus of deep ocean waters. She wore practical clothes, a work tunic and sturdy pants, but they couldn't hide her striking figure. Her silver hair was pulled back in a thick braid, and her amber eyes studied him with an expression that was part concern, part exasperation. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying that melodic quality all Nixarans had, like wind chimes in a breeze. "We need to talk." He stepped aside, gesturing her in with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Kessa, come in, please. I know what you're going to say." She entered, and the small room seemed even smaller with her presence. Kessa was tall, nearly matching his height, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor. "Do you?" she asked, turning to face him. "Because you've been avoiding me for 3 days, Marcus. I run a business here, not a charity." I know, he said quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "And I respect that, truly. I've been trying to find work, honest work, but every employer on this station wants someone with local documentation, and getting that requires credits I don't have. It's a vicious cycle." Kessa crossed her arms, her expression softening slightly. "You're not the first human to get trapped here, Marcus. The system is designed to keep off-worlders dependent." She paused, her amber eyes searching his face. "But that doesn't change the fact that I have bills to pay, suppliers to satisfy. This boarding house is all I have left." He heard the weight in those last words. He knew Kessa's story, at least the parts she'd shared during their occasional conversations in the common room. Her husband had died 2 years ago in a factory accident, leaving her with this aging building and a mountain of debt. She'd been working herself to exhaustion trying to keep it running. "I'm not asking you to throw me out," Marcus said carefully, moving closer. "I'm just asking for a little more time. 1 week, that's all I need. I have some leads on dock work, loading freighters. It's hard labor, but it pays daily." Kessa studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she uncrossed her arms and stepped toward him, close enough that he could smell her scent, something like rain on warm stone. "Marcus, I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to really consider it before you answer." His heart began to beat faster, though he wasn't sure why. "What kind of offer?" She reached out, her purple fingers touching the frayed collar of his jacket, smoothing it down in a gesture that was almost tender. "Marcus, you're an attractive man, Marcus Webb. You're kind, you're respectful, and you've been nothing but helpful around here, fixing things, being courteous to the other tenants." Her amber eyes met his, and there was something vulnerable in them now. "I've been alone for a long time running this place, keeping up appearances, but at night this building feels very empty." Marcus felt his throat go dry. He understood what she was suggesting, and part of him, the part that was tired and desperate and attracted to this strong, beautiful woman, wanted to say yes immediately. But another part, the part that his father had instilled in him, the part that valued integrity above convenience, held him back. "Kessa," he said softly, taking her hand gently and lowering it from his collar, though he didn't let go. "You have no idea how much I appreciate what you're offering, and believe me when I say there's nothing I'd want more than to say yes." I swallowed hard, meeting her eyes. "But I can't. Not like this. You're offering this because I owe you money, and that makes it transactional. It makes it wrong." Surprise flickered across her face, her amber eyes widening slightly. "Most humans wouldn't hesitate." "Then most humans are idiots," Marcus said with a rueful smile. Kessa, you deserve better than someone trying to charm their way out of debt. You deserve someone who wants you for you, not for what you can give them." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression shifting through several emotions Marcus couldn't quite identify. Then she gently pulled her hand from his and stepped back. "1 week," she said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'll give you 1 week to come up with a rent. But after that, Marcus, I'll have no choice." Proving worth. Marcus hit the streets of Nexara before dawn, his body still aching from the previous day's labor at the recycling plant. The alien city was just beginning to stir. Vendors setting up their stalls in the market district, workers trudging toward the factories that belched purple smoke into the perpetually hazy sky. He'd learned quickly that on Nexara, the early risers got the best opportunities. His first stop was the shipping docks on the eastern edge of the city, where massive cargo vessels descended from orbit to offload goods from across the sector. The foreman, a broad-shouldered Nexaran named Gren, looked him up and down skeptically. "Human, huh?" Gren said, his voice gravelly. "You people break easy. Last one I hired lasted 3 days before the gravity got to him." "I've been here 6 months," Marcus said, standing straighter. "I'm adapted, and I'm desperate enough to work harder than anyone else you've got." Gren snorted, but handed him a loader's badge. "Dock 7, freight from the mining colonies. Don't make me regret this, human." The work was brutal. Nexara's gravity was 0.8 higher than Earth's standard, and after hours of hauling containers that weighed nearly as much as he did, Marcus's muscles screamed in protest. But he kept going, thinking of Kessa's amber eyes, the way she'd looked at him with that mixture of surprise and respect when he turned down her offer. He wasn't going to let her down. By midday, he'd earned enough for 2 days' worth of meals. By evening, bruised and exhausted, he had a quarter of what he needed for rent. 6 more days. He trudged back to the boarding house as the 3 moons rose again, their light casting strange shadows across the narrow streets. The building's lights were warm and welcoming, and Marcus felt a pang of longing. This place had become home, more than any ship he'd served on, more than his cramped apartment back on Earth. And Kessa had become something more than just a landlady. She was waiting in the common room, reviewing ledgers on her datapad. When she saw him, her eyes widened slightly. "Marcus, you look terrible." He managed a tired grin. "Thanks. That's exactly what a man wants to hear." Despite herself, a small smile tugged at her lips. "I mean it. You're limping. What happened?" "Honest work happened," he said, sinking into the chair across from her with a groan. "Dock loading. It's not glamorous, but it pays." Kessa set down her datapad, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're really doing this, aren't you? Actually trying to earn the rent?" "I told you I would," Marcus said, meeting her gaze. "I keep my promises, Kessa." Something shifted in her amber eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Most people just talk, Marcus. They make promises they never intend to keep." She stood, moving toward the small kitchen area. "Wait here." She returned a moment later with a steaming bowl of something that smelled incredible. "Nexaran stew," she explained, setting it in front of him. "You need to eat if you're going to keep working like this." Marcus looked up at her, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "I know," she said softly, then hesitated, as if debating something with herself. "Marcus, about what I offered yesterday, I want you to know it wasn't just about the rent." His hand froze halfway to the spoon. "What do you mean?" Kessa sat down again, her purple skin seeming to darken slightly, a blush, he realized. "I meant what I said about being lonely, but it's more than that." She looked down at her hands. "You're the first person in a long time who's treated me like I'm more than just this building's owner. You fix things without being asked. You talk to me about things other than business. You make me laugh. I've been watching you, Marcus Webb, and I like what I see." Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. "Kessa, She interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know, so you understand why I'm rooting for you to succeed, because I want you to stay, not as a tenant paying off debt, but as someone who chose to be here."
The next few days passed in a blur of exhausting labor and stolen moments with Kessa. Marcus took every job he could find: dock loading, equipment repair, even a night shift at a factory assembling components for Starship drives. His body protested every movement, but his resolve never wavered. And Kessa was always there. She'd wait up for him in the common room, a warm meal ready, a medical kit for his cuts and bruises. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. She told him about her late husband, about the dreams she'd had of turning the boarding house into something special, a real home for travelers. He told him about Earth, about his family's shipping business that he'd left to see the stars, about the mistakes that had led him to Nyxara. On the fourth night, as she was treating a particularly nasty cut on his forearm from a slipped cargo crate, her fingers lingered on his skin longer than necessary. "You're killing yourself for this," she said quietly. "It's worth it," he replied, and meant it. Her amber eyes searched his face. "Why? Why is it so important to you to do this the hard way?" I covered her hand with his, feeling the warmth of her purple skin. "Because when I finally tell you how I feel about you, Kessa Vorn, I want it to be real. I want there to be no debts between us, no obligations, just two people choosing each other." Kessa's breath caught, her eyes glistening. "Marcus." "5 more days," he said with a tired smile. "Ask me again in 5 days." She nodded slowly, then surprised him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his forehead. A gentle, tender gesture that sent warmth flooding through him. "5 more days," she whispered.
Payment and passion. The morning of the 7th day arrived with a crimson sunrise that painted Nyxara's sky in shades of copper and gold. Marcus stood in front of the small mirror in his room, counting the credits he'd earned one final time. His hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, though his body ached in places he didn't know could ache, but from anticipation. He had it, every last credit of the rent, plus a little extra. 7 days of back-breaking labor, of pushing himself beyond limits he thought he had, and he'd done it. More importantly, he'd done it honestly, with his integrity intact. He splashed cold water on his face, changed into his cleanest shirt, and made his way downstairs to Kessa's office. She was already there, going through her morning routine of checking the building's systems. When she heard his footsteps, she turned, and Marcus saw the hope in her amber eyes, the hope she was trying so hard to hide behind a professional mask. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, her melodic voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I keep my promises," he replied, stepping into the small office and closing the door behind him. He pulled the credit chit from his pocket and set it on her desk with a soft click. 1 month's rent, paid in full, with interest for the delay. Kessa stared at the chit for a long moment, then picked it up and verified the amount on her scanner. Her eyes widened. "Marcus, this is more than you owed." Consider it an apology for making you wait, and for being a deadbeat tenant who couldn't pay on time." She set down the scanner and stood slowly, walking around the desk toward him. Her purple skin seemed to glow in the morning light streaming through the window, and Marcus was struck again by how beautiful she was, strong and graceful and real. "You actually did it," she said, softly, stopping just in front of him. "You worked yourself half to death to pay me back honestly." "I told you I would." "Most people wouldn't have," Kessa said, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Most people would have taken the easy way or just disappeared in the night. But you stayed. You worked. You proved something I didn't think needed proving." "What's that?" Marcus asked, his voice rough. "That there are still good men in the galaxy. That honor still means something." Marcus caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. 7 days ago, you asked me a question, and I told you to ask me again when there were no debts between us. Well, the debt's paid, Kessa, so I'm asking you now. Would you have dinner with me tonight? Not as your tenant, not as someone who owes you anything, just as a man who thinks you're the most remarkable woman he's ever met. Kessa's eyes shimmered with emotion.
Marcus Webb, I thought you'd never ask." "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, she pulled him down to her and kissed him. It wasn't gentle or hesitant, it was fierce and hungry. Months of loneliness and attraction finally finding release. Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her close, marveling at the way she fit against him, the softness of her lips, the warmth of her body. They broke apart, both breathing hard. "I'll take that as a yes," Marcus said with a grin. Kessa laughed, the sound like music. "You're insufferable." "You like it?" "I do," she admitted, her fingers threading through his hair. "I really, really do." That evening, Marcus waited nervously in the common room, wearing his best clothes, which wasn't saying much, but he'd done his best. When Kessa emerged from her private quarters, his breath caught. She wore a flowing dress in deep blue that complemented her purple skin beautifully, her silver hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical braid. "You're stunning," he said honestly. She smiled, almost shyly. "It's been a long time since I dressed up for anyone." They didn't go far, just to a small restaurant 3 blocks away that served traditional Nexaran cuisine. Over plates of grilled vegetables and spiced grain, they talked and laughed like they'd known each other for years instead of months. Kessa told him about her childhood in the agricultural provinces, about falling in love with her late husband at 16, about the pain of losing him and the strength it took to keep going. Marcus shared his own stories, growing up in his family's shipping business, the wanderlust that drove him to leave Earth, the adventures and misadventures that had finally brought him to Nexara. "I used to think I was searching for something, some great adventure or fortune that would make sense of why I left everything behind. But now I think maybe I was just trying to find my way here, to you." Kessa squeezed his hand, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I mean every word." They walked back to the boarding house slowly, hands intertwined, neither wanting the evening to end. When they reached Kessa's private door, she turned to him, her expression both nervous and certain. "Marcus, I don't want you to go back to your room tonight. I want you to stay with me, if you want to." "Kessa, are you sure?" he asked, cupping her face in his hands. "I don't want to rush anything. I don't want you to feel—" She silenced him with a kiss, softer this time but no less intense. "I'm sure. I've been sure since the moment you turned me down 7 days ago, since the moment you showed me what kind of man you really are. Stay with me, Marcus, please." He answered by kissing her again, deeper this time, and she fumbled with the door behind her, pulling him in. The room was warm and softly lit, and they barely noticed as they explored each other with gentle urgency, clothes falling away, hands discovering new territory. Kessa's purple skin was warm under his touch, her body strong and soft in all the right places. Marcus traced the curves of her shoulders, her waist, marveling at the trust she was giving him. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that took his breath away, moving in perfect rhythm, whispering each other's names like prayers. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Kessa's head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her back. "Stay," she murmured sleepily, "not just tonight. Stay here, with me, in this room. Let's make this real." Marcus pressed a kiss to her silver hair, his heart full in a way he'd never experienced before. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," he promised. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and love and the certainty of having finally found home, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice in coming to Nexara.
The Plague Crisis. 3 weeks of bliss passed before disaster struck. Marcus woke one morning to find Kessa's side of the bed soaked with sweat, her purple skin pale and clammy. She was shivering violently despite the warm room. "Kessa," he said urgently, touching her forehead. She was burning up. Her amber eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Marcus, I don't feel well," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He'd heard about Nexaran fever spreading through the lower districts, a brutal illness that attacked the respiratory system. Without treatment, it was fatal within days.
His blood ran cold. "Don't worry," he said, trying to keep his voice steady as panic clawed at his chest. "I'm going to get you help. I promise." Marcus spent the entire day racing between clinics and pharmacies. The answer was always the same. The antiviral medication was in critically short supply, and what remained cost more than 3 months of his wages. The epidemic had created a black market, and prices were astronomical. By evening, Kessa could barely breathe, each gasp rattling in her chest. Marcus held her hand, watching helplessly as the woman he loved slowly suffocated. He couldn't lose her. Not now, not when he'd finally found where he belonged. Desperate, he made the call he'd sworn he'd never make again. "Wraith?" Marcus said when the scarred face appeared on his comm. "It's Webb. I need medicine. Nixaran fever antivirals, and I need them tonight." The smuggler's eyes gleamed. "That's expensive merchandise, Webb. Very expensive. What are you willing to do for it?" "Anything," Marcus said without hesitation. "Name it." Wraith smiled, showing pointed teeth. "There's a pharmaceutical warehouse on the north side, heavily guarded, corporate security. I need someone who can bypass their systems and get me inside. You do that, and I'll give you enough antivirals to save your lady. We go tomorrow night." Marcus looked at Kessa, her chest rising and falling in shallow, painful breaths. "I'll do it." He spent that night caring for her, bringing cool cloths for her fever, holding her when the chills racked her body. In her lucid moments, she looked at him with such trust, such love, that it broke his heart. "Don't do anything stupid for me," she whispered hoarsely as if she could read his thoughts. Marcus kissed her forehead gently. "Rest, my love. Everything's going to be fine. I promise." But as he watched her slip back into fevered sleep, he knew he was about to break the most important promise of all, the promise to stay honest, to stay true to the man she'd fallen in love with. And he knew, without question, that he'd make the same choice 1,000 times over if it meant saving her life. Sacrifice and new beginnings. The warehouse job went sideways from the start. Marcus had barely disabled the security system when alarms began blaring, red lights flooding the corridors. Wraith's crew scattered like roaches, leaving Marcus alone as armed guards converged on his position. "Don't move," a guard shouted, weapon raised. Marcus raised his hand slowly, his heart sinking. He'd failed. Kessa was going to die, and it was his fault. The arrest was swift and efficient. They processed him through the night, charging him with corporate espionage and attempted theft. The magistrate set bail at an amount Marcus couldn't begin to afford. As they led him to a holding cell, all he could think about was Kessa, alone and dying, wondering where he'd gone. 2 days passed in agonizing uncertainty. Marcus sat in his cell, tormented by images of Kessa's final moments, of her calling for him while he rotted behind bars. He'd destroyed everything trying to save her, and accomplished nothing. On the 3rd morning, a guard appeared at his cell. "You're being released. Charges dropped." "What? How?" "Someone posted your bail and convinced the corporation not to press charges. You've got friends in high places, human." Marcus ran through the streets of Nixara, his lungs burning, terrified of what he'd find when he reached the boarding house. He burst through the front door and raced up the stairs to their room, flinging open the door. Kessa sat up in bed, weak but alive, her purple skin still pale but no longer that deathly gray. Beside her sat a young Nixaran woman with the same silver hair and amber eyes. "Marcus!" Kessa's face lit up, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was across the room in an instant, gathering her carefully in his arms. "You're alive! Oh God, you're alive! I thought you'd lost you!" "My daughter Nira arrived 2 days ago," Kessa said, her voice still hoarse but strong. "She brought medicine from the capital. She saved me, Marcus. Where were you? I was so worried." Marcus pulled back, shame flooding through him. "I was arrested, Kessa. I tried to steal the medicine you needed. I broke into a pharmaceutical warehouse. I'm so sorry. I broke my promise to you. I stopped being the man you fell in love with." Kessa cupped his face in her hands. "You became exactly the man I fell in love with," she said softly. "A man who would sacrifice everything, even his honor, to save someone he loves. Marcus, that's not weakness. That's the strongest kind of love there is. I posted your bail, Nira said quietly, standing, and I convinced the corporation to drop the charges in exchange for my testimony about their price gouging during the epidemic. You're free, Marcus. Marcus looked at the young woman who was Kessa's daughter, seeing the kindness in her eyes. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. Take care of my mother, Nira said with a small smile. Make her happy. That's payment enough. She's been alone too long. Over the following weeks, Kessa recovered slowly and Marcus never left her side. They talked about everything, his arrest, his desperation, the lengths they'd both go for each other. And through it all, their love deepened, forged stronger in the crucible of nearly losing each other. One evening as they sat together watching Nexara's 3 moons rise, Kessa turned to him. Move in with me officially. Not as a tenant, not as anything else but my partner. Help me run this place, make it the home I always dreamed it could be. Marcus kissed her gently, tasting the salt of happy tears on both their lips. I can't think of anything I'd want more. And so the human who'd arrived on Nexara, broken and desperate, found something worth more than all the credits in the galaxy. A home, a purpose, and a love that had survived the worst either of them could face together.